I could be, rendered by the CIA. I could have people come after me, or any of their third-party partners. They work closely with a number of other nations, or they could pay off the triads, or any of their agents or assets. We've got a CIA station just up the road in the consulate here in Hong Kong, and I'm sure they're going to be very busy for the next week. And that's a fear I'll live under for the rest of my life, however long that happens to be.
As he was describing there, Congressman King is one of the congressmen calling for prosecution and extradition. How would that work? Judge Napolitano, Fox News senior judicial analyst with me now. Sir, good morning to you.
Morning,
Got
Bill.
a lot to cover with you quickly in 3 minutes, okay? You ready?
Yes.
First, on the legal side, will the government go after him? We just talked to a guy who was threatened with life in prison. He eventually pled out to a misdemeanor. What happens here?
Well, I think it's fairly certain that the government will go after him. I think the intelligence community is embarrassed. I think the White House is embarrassed. Even though I believe that this program is unconstitutional, the Intelligence Committee believes it's lawful and constitutional and believes it will help them stop terrorist attacks, and they believe he has interfered with that. So they more or less need to go after him, and I think they will. And because he's in a country with which, as Peter Ducey so nicely just informed us, we have an extradition treaty, it will be relatively easy to arrest him and relatively easy to get him here and relatively easy to indict him. What happens after that is up to a jury, whether they think he's a hero or a goat.
All right, that's the legal side of it. Now to your side of it. You wrote an eloquent piece a few days ago about the Fourth Amendment. This is what Snowden talked about in that interview in Hong Kong. Have a listen here.
Even if you're not doing anything wrong, you're being watched and recorded, and the storage capability of these systems increases every year consistently by orders of magnitude, to where it's getting to the point you don't have to have done anything wrong. You simply have to eventually fall under suspicion.
What do you think of the point he's making there, Judge? What do we need to understand about what he is trying to tell us?
We need to understand that in secrecy, the government has taken laws that we have written and enacted to protect us, and it has used those laws to destroy our personal dignity and expose our innermost thoughts and behavior to the whims of government bureaucrats. Not too long ago, when he was the head of the CIA, David Petraeus informed us that the CIA was able to tap into the computer systems in your dishwasher and your microwave, and he jokingly said, "We know when you're in your kitchen." And people thought it was a joke, but it turns out it's true. It turns out that there's very little barriers between our private lives, whether it's our kitchens or our offices or our basements, and the lust of government officials to know what we're doing. Some government officials are noble and selfless people. Not all of them are, as we know from what happened with James Rosen and the Associated Press and in Benghazi and with the IRS. And what this young man just told us is that people at his level, 29 years old, had the authority to capture the keystrokes on the computer of the President of the United States, of a federal judge, of a general, of an admiral, of a police chief, of a housewife. We never openly gave that kind of authority to the government. They took it from us.
It was described last week that they know what you're thinking when you're typing it. We're told now, though, it's for our security, because, terrorism is on the line here. And they cited one example of Najibullah Zazi coming into New York City, and they stopped him. That's what they tell us now. Okay, maybe it's terrorism now in 2013. What is it in 2018? What is it in 2023? Is it your politics? Is it your health? Is it your employment?
Bill,
where does it stop?
Because we are a democracy, because we believe that we have human liberty that comes from our humanity, not from the government. If we're going to give up certain liberty in return for safety, I don't believe that that's a trade that works, but a lot of people disagree with me. It is at least a debate that we should have. We never had this debate. All of this comes as a surprise to us. It comes as a surprise to members of Congress that somehow bureaucrats in the executive branch are capturing the keystrokes and are recording the telephone conversations of half the country. The president knew it, the attorney general knew it, this misguided judge who signed the warrant for it knew it, but the rest of us didn't. If they want to take that kind of freedom away from us, stated differently, if we want to give up that freedom, it should be a voluntary surrender after a great national debate. It shouldn't be done under cover of darkness and to a surprise.
We're going to bring you on later in the week because there will be more to talk about this based on what we know now. Rand Paul says he wants to take it to the Supreme Court. We'll see whether or not he can get that. Judge, thank you. See you in the hallway. Napolitano here with us now. He raises a lot of interesting points, Martha, to something to consider.
It absolutely does. And it's something everybody at home is thinking about this morning as well. Where do you fall on this? What do you think? How do you feel about the government being able to collect all of your data, even if it's for a later date when they might need it? And what might they need it for, you might ask? Send us a tweet at Martha McCallum, at Bill Hemmer on Twitter. This is a huge national conversation, and that's what the judge is suggesting, that it ought to be up to us. And if we're good with it and we feel it's in our best interest in terms of security, then we can vote for it. Then we can approve it.
Let's have the debate.
Yeah.
But what the big point he was making is that we're having the debate after it's already happened.
After the fact. Cat's out of the bag.
But first from Fox at 3 o'clock in New York City, the American computer technician who says he leaked top secret facts on our government's phone and internet surveillance is apparently on the run. He's 29-year-old Edward Snowden. Much of what we know about his background comes from his own interviews with two newspapers, the Washington Post and the Guardian newspaper of Great Britain. The same two papers that published his apparent leaks. The U.S. Army confirms he had listed in the Army Reserve back in 2004 and that the military discharged him nearly 4 months later. Snowden told The Guardian that was after he broke both of his legs during training, ending his hopes of fighting in Iraq. He said he eventually got jobs at the CIA and the National Security Agency, putting his computer skills to work despite reportedly having no high school diploma and failing to complete coursework at a Maryland community college. More recently, Snowden said he worked at an NSA office in Hawaii for the defense contractor Booz Allen Hamilton. But he told the Washington Post he felt compelled to reveal the surveillance state that he discovered at the NSA, knowing that this could upset his, quote, very comfortable life. A life he said included supportive family, many of whom work in the government, plus his $200,000 a year salary and the home he shared with his girlfriend in Hawaii.
You can't come forward against the world's most powerful intelligence agencies and be completely free from risk, because they're such powerful adversaries that no one can meaningfully oppose them.
Many lawmakers on both sides of the aisle call the leaks a threat to our nation's security. They show how the government keeps records on all of our phone calls and much of what we do online. Snowden told The Guardian that last month he informed his boss that he needed to take a couple of weeks off to get treatment for epilepsy. And that's when he boarded a flight to Hong Kong 3 weeks before those documents finally became public. Now his whereabouts are a little less clear. We'll have Team Fox coverage this hour. We'll get to Judge Andrew Napolitano for his take on all of this and who this man is. First, our chief correspondent for the Fox Report, Jonathan Hunt, is in. What do we know about where he is now?
Well, to the best of our knowledge, Shep, he is still in Hong Kong. That is where both the Washington Post and the Guardian newspapers say that they interviewed Snowden over the weekend, interviews that were published yesterday. But the Washington Post is also reporting that a hotel receptionist in Hong Kong told them today that a man called Edward Snowden had been staying there but checked out today. So his precise whereabouts unclear. And of course, the man himself says he is likely to spend the rest of his life as a fugitive. Listen.
I could be, rendered by the CIA. I could have people come after me, or any of their third-party partners. They work closely with a number of other nations, or they could pay off the triads, or any of their agents or assets. We've got a CIA station just up the road in the consulate here in Hong Kong, and I'm sure they're going to be very busy for the next week. And that's a fear I'll live under for the rest of my life, however long that happens to be.
However long that happens to be. He also insists, obviously, in that interview and in every interview that we've read and heard so far, Shep, that he has done nothing wrong in his view.
Clearly, the United States is going to want him back, but getting him back from Hong Kong, that's not easy.
Yeah, there is an extradition treaty with Hong Kong, but 2 points worth noting here. One, there is an exception in that extradition treaty for what would be called political crimes, and clearly the authorities there might consider this to be a political crime. According to legal experts based in Hong Kong as well, the chief executive of Hong Kong would have to involve the Chinese government, which obviously has a lot of influence. Listen.
The chief executive also has to notify the Central People's Government authorities, and they have power under the Fugitive Offenders Ordinance, which is our extradition law, to prevent any extradition at their discretion.
There are also reports, of course, Shep, that Snowden wants to seek asylum in a country like Iceland, which he says is more committed than most to internet and media freedoms.
But right now in Hong Kong.
Right, as far as we know.
All right, Jonathan, thank you. Let's bring in our senior judicial analyst, Judge Andrew Napolitano, and with us from D.C., Elizabeth Goitein, co-director of Liberty and National Security Program at the Brennan Center for Justice, which describes itself as a nonpartisan law and policy institute. Thank you both. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Elizabeth, let's start with you. What's your take on here?
Well, I think that this is a very shocking story in a lot of ways. I think what we're seeing is an application of a law where the law itself is made public, but the actual application of the law is looks very different, frankly, from what this statute looks like on its face. And it represents a real intrusion into the privacy of law-abiding Americans. So I think that's why people are upset. I think there's a good reason for that.
Judge, how would you describe this man?
I would describe this man as an American hero, as a person willing to risk life, limb, and liberty in order to expose to the American people one of the most extraordinary violations of American principles, value judgments, and the Constitution itself in all of our history. A person so familiar with the intelligence community, as you heard from the excerpts that you just played. He's aware of the personal danger to himself. He knows of the likelihood of prosecution, but he also understands that the government listening to half the country is not what was bargained for when statutes were enacted in the days and weeks after 9/11.
Elizabeth, has there been a national debate, a sufficient national debate over this matter?
Absolutely not, because we haven't known that this is, in fact, the government's interpretation of these statutes, and we haven't known that it's the court's interpretation either, because it's a secret court. It rules in secret. It only has one party in front of it most of the time. That's the government. So, I mean, the president said it the other day. We need to have a public debate about potential trade-offs between our liberty and our security.
You know, Judge, a national debate normally comes before the government does something, not after it's been doing it for years.
Correct. I mean, that's what's so upsetting about this. Everybody understood, or everybody that follows this understood, that the FISA law, written in response to the abuses in the Nixon administration, created this secret court. But it was authorized to give search warrants to listen to the conversations or monitor the communications of foreign agents in the United States. Somehow, from that era in 1979 to our post-9/11 era, that went all the way from foreign agents to anybody communicating with a foreigner. And that went to everybody with a telephone, so that if anybody calls a foreigner, we would know. So now we get every Verizon customer, 113 million of them, participating in 1 billion phone calls a day, are potential suspects in the minds of the intelligence community of the United States because they might be speaking to someone overseas. They're looking for a needle in a haystack, and they have eviscerated the privacy rights of every piece of straw in the haystack, and that doesn't trouble them. Well, guess what? The Fourth Amendment was written to prevent this very behavior, the concept of a fishing expedition or a dragnet. That's why the Fourth Amendment requires specific, articulable suspicion about a specific person before a search warrant can be given. Not a search warrant so vast that it covers more than half the country.
What about all of these leaders who have implemented this and are now standing up defending this? What's your take on them as a group and as individuals?
They are unworthy of their jobs as guardians of our liberty under the Constitution.
Who is?
Whoever authorized this, whether the president authorized it, whether the attorney general authorized it, whether the judge who was appointed by President Reagan and who signed the search warrant authorized it, anybody who thinks that it is consistent with the Constitution for spies in the United States of America working for the federal government to spy on more than half the country does not understand the Constitution, does not accept our values, does not understand our history, and ought not be in office.
So what do we do about that?
We raise Cain like we are raising now. We raise hell like we are raising now. We encourage members of Congress to expose this and find out how this happened. Did Admiral Clapper lie when he was asked by Senator Wyden, Admiral, are you surveilling tens of millions of Americans and gathering information about them? Answer, no, sir. 2 months ago. Not 6 years ago, 2 months ago. That question, that answer under oath. Admiral Clapper is the director of national intelligence. He runs the NSA.
Elizabeth, do you agree?
Well, I don't question that the people who are implementing this program and who approved this program believed that they were acting in the best interest of the United States and that they are in fact acting to further our national security. The problem with that is that these powers are so broad, especially the way they're being interpreted and applied, that they open the door to tremendous potential for abuse. And so I'm not comforted when I hear the president say, I trust everyone who's running this program, because I don't think he knows every single person who is sitting at the computer. But even if he does, those aren't the same people who will be running this program in 4 years, in 8 years, in 15 years.
Elizabeth Goitein, Judge Napolitano, thank you. A few weeks ago, we said here, maybe we need to have an extra bed in the bedroom there for the government minder to just sleep there and watch everything we do. Turns out they don't need a bed. They're more like drone pilots than anything else. They can just sit somewhere else way away and watch everything we do. It's possible for them to know when I'm using my microwave oven, isn't it? So
General Petraeus, when he ran the CIA, gave a speech that he thought was secret, and somebody copied it and made it public, in which he said that new microwaves and new dishwashers have computer chips in there that the CIA can access, so they know when you're using your microwave and your dishwasher. And if they put that knowledge into an algorithm, a computer program that predicts behavior, they can predict when you're going to go in the kitchen. Do we really want a government that can do that?
Yeah, well, we already have one that can do that. What do you think the chances are they're actually doing that already? They do know every phone call you've made, to what number and at what time of day. Every one of them. They want the access to it, they can get it. Oh, they have to go through a court to do that, don't they? They already have the information. Every single bit of it. Thank you, Judge Elizabeth.
Pleasure.
Meantime, another potentially big scandal is now unfolding at the State Department. Allegations of, listen to this, prostitution, sexual assaults, and drug rings. A memo that reportedly claims the department covered it all up until right now.
Everyone, he outed himself as the source behind government leaks, and now NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden is on the run in Hong Kong.
So how serious are the risks that he faces, and what are the chances of prosecution as well?
All right, let's ask Fox News senior judicial analyst Judge Andrew Napolitano.
Good
Judge,
morning.
So you think this guy's a hero, right?
I think he's a hero for exposing one of the more massive violations of the Constitution in American history. Obviously, the Justice Department won't think that, and obviously the intelligence community won't think that. In fact, I am certain that the FBI has begun an investigation of him already in order to gather as much information about him that they can.
But that just goes against the other side of your brain, because you're about truth and justice.
Well, I have,
and yet you're saying that he's a hero.
As you know, there's two sides to me. There's that judicial hat, because I took an oath to uphold the law, even though I don't sit as a judge anymore. But there's my view that the government has gone way too far, and when people learn about what government does in secrecy, it will tend to make government transparent and accountable.
Do you believe that he has broken any laws?
Yes, he has broken laws,
Do you
absolutely.
believe he should be prosecuted?
I think the Justice Department will prosecute him, and I think a judge will probably not let him tell a jury, I did this because the public needed to know it, because under the law, I'm wearing that judicial hat, Brian, that is not a defense. He has a moral defense.
Sure.
But as far as I know from what he said the other day in the interview we saw, he doesn't have a legal defense.
You feel that the NSA program is unconstitutional because it's so broad, and the Fourth Amendment and things like that. We're not going to go into that right now. But you feel that since he was able to leak to the Guardian newspaper one of those FISA documents, he must have had help, Mr. Snowden.
I don't know if he gave that FISA order to Glenn Greenwald and Mr. Greenwald's colleagues, but it is not a document to which he would have had access. Judges of the FISA court don't even have access to documents once they read them and sign them. I myself have never seen a document like that in all the years of following this and in the 35 years of the existence of the court.
With the numbers that we showed earlier today about the millions of people who have access to this highly classified information.
Okay, those numbers are misleading.
Okay.
The numbers that you showed, that we have all been showing,
Over 1 million.
Correct, are the number of people who have classified security clearances. They don't all have document access
Might not be
to
working.
this program
Right.
and to these documents. But the document we saw, an order signed by a federal judge authorizing and directing the NSA to get all this information, it's highly unlikely that he at his level would have had that. What does that mean? Somebody else gave the document to Mr. Greenwald.
All right, Judge Napolitano, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
I think Snowden
guys.
is a hero. Email us on that.
Back now to one of our top stories. The White House refusing comment moments ago when asked about NSA leaker Edward Snowden and whether he is a traitor. Earlier today, House Speaker John Boehner was much less reluctant to weigh in on that matter.
He's a traitor. The disclosure of this information puts Americans at risk. It shows our adversaries what our capabilities are, and it's a giant violation of the law.
Joining me now, Judge Andrew Napolitano, senior judicial analyst. Not just a violation of law, a giant violation of the law.
Well, I can understand that he's upset and he wants to make a political point. I do not think it is treason. I mean, it certainly is a violation of his commitment to his employer and to the government to retain a secret with which he was entrusted. Now, he has moral arguments. And some of us applaud those arguments. I don't know that a judge would let him make those moral arguments in court. I don't know that I did it because the government needed to be exposed. I did it because the government was hiding an important secret is a defense to the violation of the oath to keep secrets secret.
That's something you use to try to persuade somebody like Eric Holder not to come after you in the first place.
Correct, correct. His lawyers may be making that argument even as we speak, or shortly will be making it. On the other hand, treason is the only crime for which the government can seek a death penalty where the defendant hasn't caused a death with his own hands. There's only been 7 successful treason prosecutions in the history of the United States of America, and they usually involve treason at the height of wartime, which results in the frustration of the movement of troops. A classic example was Tokyo Rose, was eventually pardoned by President Ford years later. But Tokyo rose during World War II, terrifying troops in the Pacific into thinking that the Japanese were behind every tree.
But you've got John Boehner suggesting he's guilty of treason, and Senator Dianne Feinstein, who chairs the Senate Intel Committee. I mean, again, strange bedfellows on this case, but I mean, this is a bipartisan use of that word now.
Yes, treason is the only crime defined in the Constitution. The framers defined it in the Constitution because it was the favorite of British kings to eliminate their opponents by accusing them of treason. Thomas More was convicted of treason for refusing to acknowledge the king was the head of the church on earth. So they redefined treason to mean waging war on the United States of America or providing aid and comfort to their enemies. The following phrase is not in there, but is usually read in there: during wartime, meaning in a violent way or in an act of violence. Treason requires the testimony of 2 independent witnesses to the same overt act or a confession by the defendant in the courtroom, not in another forum. That's one of the reasons so few people have been
really
prosecuted, because it's very, very difficult to prove.
What could they charge him with? And I know that you like what he did. You support the leak.
Okay, you talk about strange bedfellows. You have Dennis Kucinich and Rand Paul. You have Dianne Feinstein and John Boehner. You have Bill O'Reilly and Judge Napolitano calling this guy Snowden an American hero. Here's what he probably will be charged with: espionage. Now, espionage is knowingly giving information to the enemy that falls short of treason.
But doesn't it have to be with the intent of harming the United States?
Yes, and that's their difficulty of proof, but I think they'll charge him with it because, as you know, and I know from our days in the courtroom, the government always overcharges. It charges for more than it thinks it can prove, so that a guilty plea or a jury verdict will be down somewhere where they
How does
want
it play into this that you've got, I think it was 58% of the people, according to the Rasmussen poll, are against what this guy did, but that still leaves a healthy portion of America that is in favor of what this guy did. You got millions of Americans who don't want to see him charged and certainly don't want to see him go to jail for the rest of his life.
I don't think that public opinion would be taken into account by the Justice Department, but I also don't think that this Justice Department will be doing the prosecution, because this is not something that's going to happen tomorrow. It will probably be on the watch of whoever succeeds Barack Obama.
Really?
And appoints.
It's going to take that long?
Yes, I do think so.
Well, right now we don't even know where he is.
Correct. You're going to have a lot of international implications. You're going to have international treaty implications. You're going to have political implications, especially if he's somewhere in China or in a country that wishes us ill.
I can't let you go without asking, because you came out here and you commented on my discussion with Britt, and you were amazed by that clapper soundbite, where he's got the hand up. Let's just watch it again.
Okay.
Does the NSA collect any type of data at all on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans?
No, sir.
It does not.
Not wittingly. There are cases where they could inadvertently, perhaps, collect, but not wittingly.
Now, lawyers and judges are trained to look for deception. having tried 150 jury trials and thousands of non-jury trials, I'm always looking for deception. Classic signs of deception: the refusal to make eye contact, the rubbing of the hands, the couching of the terms, not wittingly and perhaps, trying to go back and rework his answer.
And not just the couching of the words, but the couching of, it's like, could he get to, like,
yes.
What?
Yes.
No.
If Hollywood had coached him as to how to appear deceptive, this was a better job than they would have coached him.
And the Oscar goes to Judge Naps. Thanks.
Pleasure.
Judge Napolitano, great to see you.
Pleasure.
We'll see if your colleagues stay quiet. In the meantime, this alert in. We were already down, but news of this ACLU suit through no accident did seem to escalate selling in the later part of the day, hinting not so just lightly here that this is expanding, that this is getting a little bit more ornery here and a little bit more involved, to a fellow who saw all of this playing out just the way it has been playing out and warned us about it. My friend and colleague, Judge Napolitano, what do you think of these latest developments?
Well, I'm not surprised that the ACLU filed the lawsuit. I just read the lawsuit. It's right on the mark. My own views are absolutely consistent with Mr. Abdo from the ACLU and with Congressman Amash. In fact, I would encourage Congressman Amash and his colleagues not to stay quiet about what they learned. What kind of a democracy is this, where the government tells our elected representatives what it's doing to violate our civil liberties and constitutional rights, and the elected representatives have to keep it to themselves?
It is true. They have been sworn to secrecy, though. It was less like that thing that Eric Holder did at the Justice Department. We're going to hold an off-the-record briefing about how we go off the reservation.
Well, that is not representative democracy as we understand it. What Congressman Amash hears, Congressman Amash should be free to tell the rest of us, whether we are his constituents or not. Now, as for this lawsuit alleges that the ACLU itself is a customer of Verizon and itself has had its own constitutional rights violated. That gets over the huge obstacle to filing these lawsuits called standing, where the plaintiff has to show that the plaintiff himself was injured. The ACLU is prepared to demonstrate that it's a Verizon customer. By the way,
how can it prove that it was injured if it was just among the 115 million phone records collected?
It's going to have to wait for some discovery to find out whether any of those phone records were acted upon.
What if they weren't?
Well, if they weren't, then there are Supreme Court cases that show that whenever the government illegally or unconstitutionally gets in your face and monitors what you do, you behave differently. You are afraid to express yourself fully. That's called chilling, and that's against the law for the government to do this. Look, the fact that this has been happening in secret, the fact that more than half the country is being watched by America's domestic spies, is potentially the greatest single violation of the Constitution by the federal government in the history of the country. This lawsuit that the ACLU filed and the attitude of Congressman Amash and his colleagues may expose the government for what it's done, which is the opposite of what we hired it to do. We hired it to enforce the Constitution, to protect our freedoms, and instead it has done the opposite.
Amazing. And fast moving. Thank you, Judge, very, very much.
You're welcome.
We got some new information now about Edward Snowden. He is quoted in a Hong Kong newspaper moments ago saying that he is neither a hero or a traitor. Judge Napolitano, Fox News senior judicial analyst, with me on this one. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Bill.
He goes on to say, I am not here to hide from justice. I'm here to reveal criminality. My intention is to ask the courts and the people of Hong Kong to decide my fate. You got a problem with him talking about that way in Hong Kong?
I think he's in Hong Kong because the reporter to whom he has been giving this information is based in Hong Kong, Glenn Greenwald. I don't have a problem with him talking that way. He's entitled to claim the protection of every court. I'm the court of the land he's in. I wouldn't trust a court in China, but I'm not in his brain, and I don't know what's motivating him.
He says he wants Hong Kong to decide his fate. The story's all about Americans. Why isn't he in Washington, D.C. making statements like this?
He wouldn't be free to speak if he were in Washington, D.C. He'd be arrested if he were in Washington, D.C. So the court where he's located will decide his fate. Not his ultimate fate, but his next fate, that is, whether or not he'll be extradited. If he was in Iceland, the court in Iceland would decide whether or not he's extradited. Not his guilt or innocence on the ultimate charge, but whether or not he goes back to the U.S. against his will.
Based on what we know today, you think the U.S. government's going to go after him? Will they bring him home or not?
Yes, I think the U.S. government will go after him. In the opinion of the U.S. government, the Obama administration, and the intelligence community, he violated his oath to keep secrets secret. In his opinion, opinion, he also took an oath to uphold the Constitution, and that is a higher obligation, and his obligation was to expose those secrets when it violated the Constitution. So he chose which oath to comply with and which oath not to comply with.
Okay, we brought you in to talk about Ron Paul, but since that news just broke, I wanted you to react
It's
immediately.
nice to be timely, Mr. Hemmer.
No, I appreciate the fact that you can react and turn on a dime. With Melissa Francis, our folks at the Fox Business Network, this is what Ron Paul said about the possibility of a drone attack on Snowden. Roll this and we'll listen to it.
I'm worried about somebody in our government might kill him with a cruise missile or a drone missile. I mean, we live in a bad time where American citizens don't even have rights and that they can be killed. But the gentleman is trying to tell the truth about what's going on.
What is going on? Hyperbole or what? Do you think he went a little bit too far?
Here's the problem. The president's use of drones to kill Americans is patently, clearly, and unconditionally unlawful. But the president has done it and has established his own rules for doing so. The Congress never established these rules. The courts never established these rules.
Al-Awlaki is a good example. The American living in Yemen.
Correct. I think Ron Paul's fear is that the president might establish a new set of rules that will enable him to take Mr. Snowden out so he doesn't have to go through the messiness of a trial which would expose even more national security secrets.
ACLU says this: it is the equivalent of requiring every American to file a daily report with the government of every location they visited, every person they talked to on the phone, the time of each call, and the length of every conversation. It continues. The program goes far beyond even the permissive limits set by the Patriot Act and represents a gross infringement of the freedom of association and the right to privacy. Is that at the core of this?
That's at the core of this, and that's why you see Democrats as well as Republicans, people who voted for the Patriot Act, even one of the authors of the Patriot Act, wanting to revisit it now because they see the abuse that it brought about in the hands of the executive branch.
James Sensenbrenner, a Republican from Wisconsin, was on our program last week. He said this is a dragnet. You can't go out there and just collect all the information and keep it and hold it.
The whole purpose of the Fourth Amendment, the requirement for a search warrant with specificity, quote, particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized, close quote, a precise quote from the amendment, is to stop and prevent dragnets and fishing expeditions.
I think the problem the government has is they haven't explained it fully. All they say is, oh, it's been going on since 9/11. You should have known about it, right? I mean, even members of Congress were told they knew about it, and they've come out and said they haven't. The problem I see here is that in 2013, you used the example of terrorism. But if you're storing the information to infinity, what excuse do you use in 2023? Or 2033? Is it no longer terrorism? Is it your taxes? Is it your health records, your financial records, your politics? What is it?
The founders didn't have a problem like this, but they did mistrust an executive branch of a government with powers that it could be abused. And that's why they wrote a constitution to restrain the government. You and Martha just ran a great quote from the New York Times not too long ago. This proves, President Obama's abuse of this power proves that when unlimited power is put in the hands of the executive, it will be abused. What makes it unlimited? The lack of fidelity to the Constitution.
Judge, to be continued.
Absolutely.
Thank you, sir.
Anytime, Bill.
At ease, Counselor.
Thank you.
All right, another IR, mess. Now, over the agency allegedly seizing millions of medical records, a House panel just launching an investigation into that one. This after a lawsuit questioning the legality of any of this to Judge Napolitano and what he makes of this. I can't keep up with this stuff.
No, you can't keep up with it. It's one cascading potential scandal after another. Now, this is a head scratcher. The allegations in this lawsuit are that IRS agents came armed but not holding their guns into insurance companies and stole the medical files of 60 million Americans, claiming they, the IRS, were entitled to it and had a search warrant for it, but declining to show the search warrant. Now, there's a bunch of bells and whistles there. Right. First of all, when the government shows up, they don't want to use force unless they have to. So if they have the search warrant, they're going to show it. Secondly, the idea of them showing up, knocking on the door, armed and with a search warrant is not the way it works. A lawyer for the IRS, sends the search warrant to a lawyer for the insurance company. Says, there are 10 million, 60 million files. We would need trailer trucks for them. Let's work out how we're going to get them. But yet the allegation is bursting in, threats of force, threatening individuals, and seizure of documents. That's what the lawsuit says. The lawsuit is filed by a lawyer in Santa Monica, California. The plaintiff is anonymous. The defendants are anonymous. The plaintiffs don't want to say who they are. They don't want to reveal to the world that their files have been stolen. And the lawyer who filed it doesn't know the names of the IRS agents. So it's John Doe versus John Doe.
Well, is it real?
It's a head scratcher. I don't know if it's real. If it's real, one would think it would be on the front page of all the newspapers, whether the newspapers who wish the president
eventually they
well
will
or
find
ill.
out. Right? Eventually we'll find out if
Right.
indeed it's up to snuff. But let's take out the coming in to order this stuff with Soprano-like intensity, right?
Did you have to say Sopranos?
I did. I'm sorry.
All right.
But let's say they just got it anyway, under no, threatening pretenses. What's bad is bad.
Well, there are federal statutes that protect medical records from being revealed or seized. The IRS has no lawful authority to examine
But the
medical
IRS
records.
is going to take over much of the administration of health care.
They're going to, theoretically,
Theoretically.
and I have not read all 2,700 pages. I've read the portions of it I needed to read to come on your show and the shows of our colleagues. Theoretically, they're going to administer extracting money from us if we don't have health insurance. That doesn't give them the right to know when I've sneezed.
Very good point. All right, Judge, thank you very much.
Here we are with the gavel. Well, the secret's out. The secret's out. Google, one of the biggest companies caught up in the spying scandal, now revealing how exactly they hand over data to the government. The company saying in a statement that we deliver that information to the United States government, generally through secure FTP transfers and in person. So can Google now be trusted, and all these other companies who are doing the same thing? Joining us now to weigh in, Fox News senior judicial analyst Judge Andrew Napolitano. Okay, this is a complicated topic, so help us break this down. Google has no choice, right?
Correct, correct. When the government comes calling with a warrant signed by a judge of the FISA court saying you will turn over all this information to the person that shows up with the warrant, Google has no choice but to comply. It costs Google a lot of money to comply. You're not asking about going through a file and handing a piece of paper over. You're talking about thousands of person hours of work intended to gather the information the government wants. Google can't challenge the warrant, and Google can't reveal the existence of the warrant. If it challenges it or reveals the existence of it, it breaks the law that authorizes
So
it.
if somebody was doing an interview with an executive at Google before we knew about all this and said, hey, are you doing any kind of, inside operations with the government, they'd have to say no, and they'd technically have to lie.
Yes, they would be obliged to lie, even if they were asked that question under oath in a courtroom. This is the conundrum that the statute has required. We have a statute that says when you swear to tell the truth, you have to tell the truth. We have another statute that says if you get one of these FISA warrants, you can't tell anybody you got it, even if that means lying.
So they couldn't be charged with perjury.
Not the Google people, no.
Now, let me ask you, how did Twitter not have to comply? Because at least the reports out there right now are that Twitter is not complying with this. Not sure if that's the case or not, but could it be that way?
No, it could not be that way.
Okay.
If the government gets a warrant from a FISA court judge, one of those warrants that nobody can talk about and nobody can challenge, and serves it on Twitter or anybody else that is the custodian of someone else's records. So we're not talking about an FBI agent coming to your house. We're talking about an FBI agent going somewhere where records are kept about you, your telephone provider, your internet service provider, or Twitter. They have no choice but to comply. The government doesn't like this. The government doesn't like having to go to the place where the records are kept. And the Obama administration, this is really over the top, has proposed legislation that will put Twitter, AT&T, Verizon, Google, Microsoft computers in FBI offices so that when the government gets one of these warrants, the federal agent can just go to the Google computer and get it right there. I can't imagine that legislation will pass in this environment, but the Obama administration has proposed it.
I can imagine that these companies, when they started, never knew that they were going to be involved in all of this government activity on top of everything else. It's an amazing transformation.
I think you're probably right.
Judge, thanks so much for breaking it down for us.
Anytime.
Have a good weekend.
You as well.
Taking to the judge, why don't we? Fox News senior judicial analyst Judge Andrew Napolitano was he? Well, if it could have prevented 9/11, I suppose under this logic, they could just give us all minders and then nothing bad would ever happen.
Under this logic, they can cut as many holes in the Constitution as they want and argue that if we had been able to do that 12, 13 years ago, it would have prevented 9/11. I'm disappointed in FBI Director Mueller. In his final testimony before Congress, he's still singing the tune that constitutional liberties can be subordinated to the government's need to find bad people. And he's making an argument which is inconsistent with the history of the FBI. The FBI, more than any other law enforcement entity in the history of the United States, has shown deference and respect to the Constitution. He's basically saying they can't. They need to cut the holes in order to get the bad guys, and they don't. It's absolutely unnecessary, as Congressman Dingell argued, for the FBI to get the phone numbers of everybody that works for Verizon in order to find out who's calling from San Diego to Yemen. They could have gotten the incoming call in Yemen, and from that they would have known who was making the call, and then they could have gotten a warrant on that house in San Diego. So to suggest that they can forget about the Fourth Amendment, theoretically break down any door they want, theoretically arrest anybody they want, would give us an America that nobody would want to live in.
And yet we hear from all corners of the government, I mean, the White House defends this, that everybody's defending this, as if maybe they never read the Fourth Amendment. I mean, I don't understand it.
Well, Congressman Dingell, it's funny because I don't usually agree with Congressman Dingell, but he made some really great points today. The statute in the Patriot Act that permits them to get all these phone records requires them to tell the judge, whom they've asked to sign the order, that the phone records are relevant to an ongoing investigation. How could they claim that 113 million phone records are relevant to an investigation unless they claim that all 113 million people are involved in some kind of a conspiracy, which is obviously not the case? So they skirted even the law that let them get these phone records by omitting the key point of, is this information relevant, or is this a dragnet? Is this a fishing expedition? Which it obviously was, and which the Fourth Amendment was specifically written to prevent the government from engaging in.
And yet they've done it, and nobody, if history tells us anything, nobody's going to be punished, and they're going to keep on doing it. If they've made it clear, they're going to keep on doing it, and the people just sit around with their hands under their legs and say, oh, well, there are a lot of scandals now. This isn't just another scandal. This is in direct violation of the Constitution.
Well, here's the thing. If they do not arrest and prosecute someone, and in that prosecution use evidence obtained from this 113 million person warrant, then nobody will be in a position to challenge it.
No one will have standing.
And if no one has standing to challenge it, they will do it again and again and again. Unless and until the American public gets sick and tired of it and elects a government that respects the Constitution. Don't hold your breath.
Thank you, Judge.
You're welcome.
So let's take this to the judge now. Fox News senior judicial analyst Judge Andrew Napolitano. I don't even want to
Claude Rains comment.
I don't even want to talk about that aspect of that. I want to talk about the leaker and what he said today. I mean, he appears, and you read the transcript, all the questions in there. He appears to be angry that the president allowed so-called abuses, the NSA program.
Well, I think you know that I share his view that they were abuses, and
Right.
I share his anger, though my anger wasn't piqued the way his was, because I didn't know what was going on in the background or beneath the surface when General Clapper directly and pointedly lied under oath to Senator Wyden and a Senate investigation committee. Are you collecting, is the NSA collecting vast amounts of data about millions of Americans?
But a federal
Answer,
judge
no, sir.
signed off on this, Judge.
Well,
A
that
FISA judge signed off on it until a higher court says otherwise. It's legal.
It's legal, but it's unconstitutional, and it's not legal for Senator Wyden to be lied to. General Clapper knows how to communicate that information without lying under oath.
Supreme Court has said there is no privacy right over telephone records that are handled by a third party. Let me put it up on the screen. The seminal case, Smith versus Maryland, 1979. We doubt, the court said, that people in general entertain any actual expectation of privacy in the numbers they dial. All telephone users realize they must convey phone numbers to the telephone company, since it is through telephone company switching equipment that their calls are completed. And the same, Judge, could be said about internet communications because they're handled by third-party service providers.
An out-of-date case, totally and utterly irrelevant today in the era of the internet and in the era of GPS devices in your telephones. Let me tell you what a phone call can tell the spies about. Right. Who made the call, who received it, where each party was, how frequently they talked. Right. They can then put that into an algorithm, a preset program that will analyze it and say, talks to this person every Tuesday at 3 o'clock.
It reveals suspicious patterns, arguably about terrorist activity.
It reveals everything. If it was suspicious, they would go to a federal judge and get a search warrant for that phone.
Right? Because you're going to a judge yet a second time to get more specific content-related information.
That's what they should have done the first time. Any judge who signs a search warrant to let the government look at the phone records of half the country does not understand the history, meaning, value, and purposes of the Fourth Amendment. That is a dragnet and a fishing expedition which the Fourth Amendment was written to insulate us against.
You share the anger of Edward Snowden, the leaker. I want to quote Bob Schieffer. He said, Snowden put the nation at risk, and when you flee the country rather than accept responsibility for your actions, that's not courage. It is cowardice. That's Bob Schieffer at CBS.
You know, a lot of heroes are flawed. I called this young man a hero last week. I call him a hero again. I can't defend all of his personal behavior, and I don't know what's going through his head. But the behavior that is utterly indefensible is the head of the American spies lying under oath to Congress, the president spying on half the country and not acknowledging
You would agree he does not qualify under the whistleblower statute. This is not misconduct as identified under the statute, because the judge signed off on it is legal. It's not misconduct.
I would not agree. This is misconduct of the highest sort for the government to do that which the Constitution was written to prevent them from doing.
Judge
Did you expect that I would change my views, young Jared?
No, of course not. You and I have disagreed for 20 years.
Yes, we have.
We're not going to change it today. Judge Napolitano.
It's always a pleasure no matter what we talk about.
Thank you very much.
Of course.
All right.
More and more states are building up massive databases of driver's license photos to help identify criminals. But that means your DMV photo is being analyzed, measured, and saved into a database where it's compared against a list of potential crooks. So is that fair? Is it legal? Fox News senior judicial analyst Judge Andrew Napolitano joins me now.
You know, the government will do whatever it can get away with to make its job a little easier. Prior to 9/11, if you gave the government any information, a photograph for the DMV, tax information to the IRS, personal information about where you're traveling to for the TSA, each department had to keep it separately. After 9/11, they began to share all that, and that's how these databases came into existence.
So recently, the Supreme Court ruled what about DNA?
Well, recently, the Supreme Court ruled that a state law which mandates swabbing your mouth, taking a Q-tip and putting it on the inside of your mouth to collect DNA on the basis of an arrest, not conviction, just an arrest, is constitutional. It's an interesting dissent. Justice Scalia, arguably the most conservative justice, Justices Ginsburg, Sotomayor, and Kagan, arguably the most liberal justices, dissented and said this is going to bring us to a police state. Now, if you combine the ability of the government to get your DNA just on the basis of an arrest, plus all this digital information that they keep, information given for innocent reasons, you give them a great deal of information about us, far more than we ever expect that they would have. Forget about the NSA spying. That's another story and another level of government surveillance.
But this is interesting because it's sort of like how many other stories are we going to now continue to look at and uncover where you specifically believe is overreaching?
Well, not only do I believe it's overreaching, the Constitution says it's overreaching. You see, the police can't just investigate anybody. The police couldn't start following you and taking pictures of you and reading the credit card places of where you took your children for dinner. There has to be what the Constitution requires as articulable suspicion, a reason to suspect you have done something wrong. Without the articulable suspicion bar, so to speak, without that gate, this could be a police state. And the police could investigate anybody they wanted for any reason they wanted until they found something wrong.
Now we know why a driver's license photo is so important, though.
Now we know why a driver's license photo is
one.
So dangerous.
I know.
Because it gives away too much information, believe it or not.
I'm just kidding with you. All right, have a great rest of the week. We'll probably see you again.
You too.
Thanks, Judge.
Does the NSA have the ability to listen to Americans' phone calls or read their emails under these two programs?
No, we do not have that authority.
You know, my friend the judge was watching that exchange today, and he was hurling his lunch at the TV set. But he's so thin and fit, it was just, you know, pears and apples, and that was it. But my goodness, what did you think of that?
Because if it were in my courtroom, I would have said, General, answer the question. Question, does the NSA have the ability to listen to phone calls? Answer, it is not in our authority. Of course he doesn't have the legal authority to answer the phone calls. That's not what the question asked. The question asked, does he have the practical ability to do so? And he couldn't answer that because the answer is yes. And the president and General Alexander are both saying, trust us. The same administration said, trust us on Benghazi till we changed the story 4 times. The same administration said, trust us on the James Rosen Fox News search warrant affair. The same administration that says, trust us on the IRS targeting conservatives. Why should we trust them?
So you don't buy when they say, Judge, that say what you will of these various programs, surveillance and otherwise, they got the bad guys now and then, no fewer than 50 times, including what could have been an attack on the New York Stock Exchange.
Isn't it interesting that they, as Charlie Gasparino just so eloquently pointed out, they can pick and choose which classified episodes they're going to reveal. Of course they're going to pick and choose the ones that make them look
And by
good.
the way, there's no way of knowing that the Verizon program itself led to that stock exchange thing.
Charlie's correct and the skeptics are correct.
So you don't think they comported themselves well today? Or when Wayne Simmons, a big defense guy, comes on and says, hey, this is a real threat, a real world of danger, Neil, we got to wake up, you say?
Wayne is my longtime friend and colleague, even when, and maybe especially because we disagree. And I'll give him credit on this. The NSA people answered questions professionally. There was none of this as we got from Attorney General Holder and FBI Director Mueller. I don't know. But I think it is still bogus. Let me tell you this.
Real quick.
When they get a phone number, a child can punch the phone number into a computer and find out whose it is and where they live. And then this becomes their listening device, even when it's not on, as long as the battery is in it. And they know that. Did they tell us that today?
No,
they did not.
Well, I hope you enjoy your dinner tonight. We'll have more after this.
You're about to get 3 questions and 3 answers. I want you to listen specifically and carefully to question number 2 and answer number 2. And then listen to the rest of it, then we'll talk about it. Here we go.
General Alexander, is the NSA on private companies' servers as defined under these 2 programs?
We are not.
Is the NSA have the ability to listen to Americans' phone calls or read their emails under these 2 programs?
No, we do not have that authority.
Does the technology exist at the NSA to flip a switch by some analyst to listen to Americans' phone calls or read their emails?
No.
All right, did you hear that second question? Does it have the ability to listen to our phone calls or read our emails? He said no. We do not have that authority. Ability is one thing, authority is another. Did you get that? There's more, too. Judge Andrew Napolitano is here, our senior judicial analyst. Do you, sir, have the ability to listen to or read listen to our phone calls or read our emails? No, we do not have that authority.
In my courtroom or in any courtroom in the United States of America, the response would be, General, answer the question. Answer the question that was asked of you, which is not what he did. Now, I don't know what's in his head, so I don't know if it's a lie, but it's a material misleading. It's giving the impression that they don't have the ability, because he starts out by saying no, that they don't have the ability to read emails and listen to phone calls. He modifies that by saying we don't have the authority to. We know they don't have the authority to. We know the statute doesn't give them the authority. That's not our concern. Our concern is that they have grabbed these phone calls and grabbed these emails and have the temptation to listen to them and read them, whether they have the authority to or not.
Or that they're there for some other person who may be in some position of authority, or some other person who might get a hold of this stuff. Would that person have the authority? It wouldn't really matter, would it? And the third part of that question and answer was, can you basically flip a switch and listen in or read in? Maybe there's no switch, but there ain't no doubt they can do that.
There's
zero, none. Not a little fraction of a percentage. There's no doubt, 100% they can do it, 100%.
Fox News has been in contact with former NSA agents and staffers who have pushed back aggressively on the general's answer to that last question and have argued, without giving specifics, that they have the ability to listen to phone calls without going to the facility where the phone calls are stored.
Yep. Here's the thing, Judge. As a reporter, what you try to do is ask questions of all the people involved with the subject on which you're reporting. And as a reporter, when you ask one question of one person and then they answer another question, and then you ask a question like the flip switch, and then there's a fib about it, and then you ask somebody else, and then someone else in charge, like maybe the top person in charge of everything, says this is transparent. When it's not transparent, there are checks and balances, but it is by definition not transparent. And you just get all of these untrue things along the way. Then you start to wonder, what's going on here?
Well, you know, in a courtroom, the people asking the questions are generally professional cross-examiners.
Well, Mike Rogers ought to be a professional asker.
He
ought to be.
He's a former FBI agent, and he probably knows the answers to these questions before he's asking them. He has a duty to follow up on the question, whether he likes the answer to the question or not.
How could you ask someone a question like, do you have the ability to? That's what he wants to know. Do you have the ability? No, we do not have that authority. Sir, that's not what I asked you. Do you have the ability? The answer to that question is yes.
Yes.
Why is everybody involved with this? I'm not a crazy conspiracy theorist. I've never have been. I'm a journalist. These things add up. 7 and 7 does not make 400.
Well, that's why it doesn't necessarily take a professional cross-examiner to ask these questions. A journalist knows. A person that understands the English language and can hear ordinary plain words knows that ability and authority are two different things. We are talking about a popularly elected government in a free society spying on more than half the people in the country. And the chief spy is being asked a question under oath. He has a duty and a moral obligation to be crystal clear and not to mislead and to answer the questions put to him.
They want transparency, and there should be a debate. Transparency means questions asked and questions answered by the employer, that's us and our representatives, and the employee, that's you, the one being paid to do this stuff for us. And instead, you get half-truths, obfuscations, and something called transparency being called the exact same thing as checks and balances. Those are different things. All the checkers and all the balancers seem to be in cahoots with a lack of transparency and truthfulness.
And the clear, distinct impression is left that the testifier wants to leave, and that is at odds with the history and the truth.
This is not over.
No. No, it's not over.
The polls have turned on it, though. They've convinced the American people, oh, it's fine. Huh.
Well,
wake up.
We'll see where it goes.
Time to wake up.
Listen, somebody...
Obfuscations, half-truths, asking one question, answering another question. This is not how you get to the bottom of things.
This does not serve the American people well when they're not told the truth.
It's not right.
We have seen this before.
They know it.
You and I did this a couple of weeks ago. I don't remember who the testifier was. It was the exact same thing. Somebody giving a slightly different answer to the question.
And they just let it go.
Correct. Nobody followed up.
Nobody follows up.
Correct.
Thank you, Judge.
You're welcome.
President Obama again defended those surveillance programs today, saying lives have been saved. You know what, Judge? They said that they foiled a plot to bomb the stock exchange. First of all, that plot was in the very early talking stages, and then they said, well, what did it actually stop it? They said, well, you'll just have to ask the jury who convicted them. Do you know the plot to bomb the stock exchange was not even part of the final document that they went to prison for? It wasn't even part of the charging document.
Wow.
Wasn't included.
That's the problem.
They left that out.
That's the problem.
That little detail.
That's the problem with letting this agency decide what it's going to reveal and what it's going to keep secret. Of course it's going to reveal that which makes it look good.
Of course.
And of course it's going to keep secret that which doesn't make it look good.
Open it up.
We have no way to check and balance it because there is no transparency.
Yeah. Mr. Government, tear down this wall.
Well, they're used overseas, but it turns out drone surveillance doesn't end there. Brand new testimony from the director of the FBI reveals the agency is also using drones right here in the United States. Doug Lazader has the details. He joins us now live from Washington. Good morning, Doug.
And Patty Ann, good morning. This was something of a surprise. The director of the FBI was asked a pretty simple question about drone use. His answer may touch off another debate about the surveillance of U.S. citizens. So could one of these be coming to a neighborhood near you? Well, the truth is it may have already happened. FBI Director Robert Mueller acknowledging that drones aren't just for overseas use or border enforcement. The Bureau has already used them for domestic surveillance.
Does the FBI use drones for surveillance on U.S. soil?
Yes.
A one-word answer. One incident earlier this year, in fact, involved a standoff with a man in Alabama who was holding a young boy hostage in an underground bunker. But other potential uses raise significant questions about privacy rights and how far the FBI or other law enforcement agencies can go.
But law enforcement today, and Director Mueller is no exception here, is using technology in ways that we don't know about, we haven't authorized, and is basically a shortcut around the Constitution. And that is to send a drone over private property to spy on people.
So the policies are still being developed here, and this issue is just going to get more and more complicated. The FAA estimates that by the year 2020, Patty Ann, there could be 30,000 drones in use. Back to you.
All right, Doug Luzader, live in Washington. Thank you.
Holy cow, 30,000. That is sure a lot.
Welcome back, everybody. The New York City Council pushing a new bill to block cops from describing suspects because it might offend them. Police are fighting back with this ad.
Good time to be a criminal. They claim the proposal would basically blindfold and handcuff them from doing their jobs. Joining us right now, Fox's senior judicial analyst, Judge Andrew Napolitano. Judge, is it right to stop describing suspects by how tall they are, the color of their skin, the way they look, their body type?
It's absolutely insane, and it's a material interference with the ability of the police to do their basic work. It is almost the equivalent of putting the blindfold on that police officer that we just saw in the ad. In fact, the ad is very effective. Now, I know you don't believe this. I know you don't believe me that I'm sitting here defending the police, but they have a perfectly legitimate, utterly necessary, valid job to do. If they can't describe somebody on the basis of their appearance because the description might offend the person, then they cannot effectively communicate from a victim or a witness to the police to another policeman.
Well, how is it offensive to be able to say that I'm a woman running down the street? I mean, you can't even use gender if this thing passes.
You can't use gender, you can't use race, you can't use disability. So you can't say a one-armed white person in a wheelchair was seen moving down the street.
What do you say? Get him.
Pink shirt.
Your question to me is a perfect example of how this will impair the police.
Right.
What cop in a life and death situation is going to stop and think about what proper language should I use as opposed to how do I stop this person who just, I think, committed this crime?
Well, what's also so insane about it is that racial bias is already on the books. It's already illegal to do that.
Yes,
right?
it is. And what's equally as insane is I think this is all political. I think that members of the city council that are pushing this are just trying to curry favor with some groups of voters. Because this would actually enable the bad guy who is offended by the words the police use to describe him to sue the city because of the mental anguish perceived by the use of words which arguably are accurate.
It's so ridiculous, and it looks like it might pass.
It does look like it might pass. Governor Bloomberg, Mayor Bloomberg, again, I rarely agree with him, I believe will veto this, and then we'll see if the city council has enough votes to override the veto. And then, if this comes to pass, the world will be, in New York City, will be a more dangerous place.
Right. But the big question is, will we be allowed to describe a criminal running from the cops who was drinking a 32-ounce soda? Then you talk
he's
about
committing another crime.
Yeah.
Even though, as you know, that was thrown out.
Not as long as I can work. As long as I can work.
You're in
for
favor of those big gulp soda bans?
Soda's killing
you
us.
like the government telling you people how to live your life?
Oh gosh, here we go.
Radio, what's like for 4 years.
And there's the laugh. Life wouldn't be the same unless I heard that. All right, Judge Alicious, see you later.
And seems the feds, Catherine, have not yet released details on those other foiled terror plots about which they speak so often.
Well, two congressional sources confirmed to Fox News that the list of 50 alleged terrorist plots disrupted with the help of these controversial data collection programs was not provided to the House Intelligence Committee, even though that's what was promised by the NSA director earlier this week. And now we're learning the FBI deputy director may have misspoken about the stock exchange plot.
That was in the very initial stages of plotting to bomb the New York Stock Exchange.
Would you say that their intention to blow up the New York Stock Exchange was a serious plot? Or is this something that they kind of dreamed about, talking among their buddies?
I think the jury considered it serious since they were all convicted.
Well, it turns out there was no jury trial, and the suspects cut deals for lesser charges, what's called material support to a terrorist organization. It was not connected to anything related to the New York Stock Exchange. The FBI confirming that its deputy director misspoke, but they are standing behind the substance of his statement that they believe the plot was the real deal. Shepard.
The deputy director misspoke. Catherine Herridge live in Washington. Catherine, thank you. Now listen to me.
You're welcome.
The deputy director misspoke. The centerpiece of this entire thing that went on Capitol Hill, the 50 terror plots have been broken up. We collect this data and it has saved lives. The New York Stock Exchange may still be standing because we did this. Well, are we sure this data made a difference? Well, sir, you should really ask the jurors who convicted him. No jurors convicted them of anything. And when they pleaded to charges and agreed, yes, this is what we did, there wasn't one single mention of the New York Stock Exchange. Judge Napolitano called him out the next day on it. We called him out that night on it. And the centerpiece of his statement was, the jury convicted them. We saved the stock exchange. None of it was true. And he misspoke on the centerpiece of the argument, the one example of the 50 that they're holding up for the nation as this is why we collect this data, and he misspoke at the very fundamental level of what the... Judge Napolitano, when is enough going to be enough?
I don't know, but I hope that the American public learns a lesson.
I hope they're listening.
This.
I pray they're listening.
I mean, we got a vastly different view from the truth than we should have gotten. We got a questioner who, Congressman Rogers, chairman of the committee, former FBI agent, who was no more interested in telling us the truth than those answering the questions, the deputy director of the FBI and General Alexander.
Do you have the ability, was the question, do you have the ability to listen to our phone calls and read our emails? They do. He said, no, we do not have the authority. Question asked and not answered.
So there should have been,
unbelievable.
Unless the questioner was happy with that answer, he should have followed up and said, General, that's not the question I put to you. Instead, it was just ended right there with the impression that they don't have the ability to do it. Our colleague here will tell you what they have the ability to do, but we also know from former NSA staffers who communicated with Fox News that they darn right do have the ability to do it. Not the lawful authority, but the practical ability.
What will the congressional record be of the testimony to members of Congress about what they've done with all of that data? Will the congressional record still read, well, you'll have to ask the jurors who convicted them about the plot to bomb the New York Stock Exchange? Not mentioned.